Jorinde and Joringel. A very long time ago, so long ago that you can't fathom it, there was a forest in what is now called Germany. And in this forest, it was said that there was a castle that would appear to some people from time to time. And not everybody was able to see this castle. And why and how this castle would appear to people is a mystery. But the castle was there, and people knew the stories about the castle. And the stories went that you should never go within 100 paces of this castle. And this castle was like an old ruin. It wasn't majestic and clean and looked after and beautiful. It was a crumbling mess of stone with an old tower that peeped out above the beech trees and the oaks and the cypress trees and the pines that were all crammed together so densely that hardly any light could get through to the forest floor. But there behind it you would see the tower of the castle. And if, according to the stories, you went within 100 paces, a terrible thing would happen. See, if you were a man, you would be frozen to the spot, and you wouldn't be able to move unless the spell was deliberately broken by she who made the spell. And if you were a woman, you would be turned into a small bird, and you would be taken away into the castle and locked up there with thousands of other birds, never to be set free again. And one day there were two young lovers walking through the forest, Jorinde and Joringel. And these young folk were so in love with each other that they forgot the old stories. They were enjoying the gorgeous feeling of the summer sunshine that was warming the skin, getting through the tops of the trees and just making their skin glow with warmth. They were enjoying holding each other's hands, looking into each other's eyes, running in and out of the river, splashing, joking, laughing, hearing the sound of the birds, singing with their many different songs, smelling the scent of the strong flowers, seeing the colours of the purple foxglove. But they went in too deep, didn't they? And they ended up going 100 paces within the castle because they were young and in love, and they forgot that the forest can be a dangerous place. And there, Joringel froze. He couldn't move. And in that moment, he could see the castle that he'd never seen in the forest before, over through the tops of the thick trees. And he wanted to turn around and say to Jorinde, we shouldn't be here. Look, it's the castle, we need to go. But all that came out of his mouth was because his mouth was frozen still and his body was frozen still, and he was having a wild panic attack, but nothing could be done to make his body move and respond. And then Jorinde, she flew in front of him because she'd become a nightingale, a gorgeous, beautiful nightingale, singing a beautiful song, but flying into trees and falling all over the place because she had no skill at flying, because she was still a human at heart. And at that moment, they heard the devilish sound of a screech owl. And this owl, with these mad, crazy eyebrows. I mean, have you ever seen eyebrows on an owl? I haven't, but apparently, by all accounts, this owl had eyebrows, and it was out there in the daytime, screeching and screaming, and it flew, and it grabbed Jorinde, the beautiful nightingale, in its sharp claws. She felt them dig into her neck. They were so sharp, they were like knives. Drops of blood fell to the floor, and the whole time, Joringel was stood there frozen, just watching, just unable to say or do anything. And the screech owl flew off to the castle, took her there, and he knew who this screech owl was. The screech owl was the old fairy of the castle, an old woman at night with skin that was a sickly yellow that was bordering on green. And she would turn into a screech owl or a cat in the daytime at will, and she would remain as an old, hunched, tiny fairy woman at night with this terrible green lumpy skin. And he was heartbroken, he was terrified, his heart was still going at 100 miles an hour, and then she came in human form. The old fairy woman came up to him, and she was only as high as his knees, perhaps his waist, and she looked up at him and she said, "Greetings, Zachiel. When the moon shines upon the birdcage, you may set her free, Zachiel." And he just froze. He had no idea what she was talking about. Zachiel? Nobody had ever called him Zachiel before. Why was she calling him that? But she set him free. She just laughed. "Zachiel, you can set her free if you try, if you wish." She went back off after touching his knee with her old bent finger, and went back off through the thick trees back to her castle, and Joringel was free. And he so wanted to go to the castle and set Jorinde free and try to help her, but he knows that if he went back within 100 paces of the castle, he would just be frozen again. And that experience was so terrifying and so awful that he just couldn't do it. So he ran off. He ran off, but not back to the village where he came from, because he couldn't go and live in that village again, not without Jorinde. He found another village. He became a shepherd. And he settled in this village, and he would come to the forest. He didn't make any friends in this village. He didn't associate with anyone, but he worked near the forest. He would come into this forest, and he would longingly look over at the castle, knowing that Jorinde was in there, but being powerless to do anything about it. But one day, he was out in the forest, and it was a beautiful evening. And he lied down for a sleep near some magical foxglove flowers that were dangling their bell-like petals down towards his face, glowing with exquisite white and purple bells. The sun was shining on his face. He took in these deep breaths, taking in the gorgeous scent of the grass beneath him, and he went into this beautiful sleep. And he dreamt of a red flower, the most unusual red flower you've ever seen, with huge petals. And inside, in the centre, there was a white pearl. And in his dream, he could take this flower and he could liberate anything from its suffering. And in the dream, he went to the castle and he found Jorinde locked up in her cage, and he set her free. And he woke up from this dream, but he woke up excited. He could see the full moon shining in the sky. Dusk was over and the night was upon him, but he knew that this dream was a premonition, and he looked around with the last bit of moonlight that was there. Rather than running home to safety, now was the time. And of course he found a flower just like the flower in his dream. Instead of a pearl in the centre, there was dew that had somehow stayed there all day, this dew, in the shape of a pearl, and he knew it. He grabbed the flower, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran towards the castle. He knew where he would find it. Instinctively, he knew where he would find it, even though this castle would appear at will, and so it did. And he ran through the beeches and through the oaks and through the cypresses and through the pines up to the door of the castle, this crumbling stone ruin, and he touched the door with the flower and it flew open. And he continued to run. He ran through. He was going to find Jorinde, his love who had never forgotten about. He ran through this freezing cold castle. You can't believe how cold it was. Even though it was summer, he could see his breath running as he was panting and running through to this wing where he could hear all of these birds. All of these birds, it sounded like hundreds, maybe thousands of them. And he was running, he was panting, he was desperate through this castle, just, Jorinde, I'll find you, Jorinde. And he flew into this wing of the castle. It was more than a room, it was a wing, and there were thousands upon thousands of birds in all kinds of cages with golden bars and silver bars and rusted bars, and in each one there was a bird inside going crazy, flinging itself against the bars, chirping and screaming, desperate to get free. What a horrible atmosphere it was. He knew that Jorinde was in here, and he was holding this flower, grasping it, knowing that he could liberate her and set her free, but how would he know which bird in here was Jorinde? There were 7,000 birds in there, all screaming, all desperate to be set free. But in that moment, he turned around and he saw the old fairy woman trying to sneak away, holding onto one cage in particular, and he knew that was Jorinde. And he ran towards and he touched the cage with the flower, and Jorinde burst out of the cage, exactly as she was before, as beautiful and fresh-faced and delightful as she was before, when he was younger and more innocent and in love with her those years ago. The old woman ran away. He managed to throw the flower and touch her. As she ran off, she turned into cat form. He could see her slinking away as a black cat, her little tail slithering like an evil snake as she disappeared. But he picked up his flower and he hugged Jorinde, and they just melted into each other. That feeling, it was like returning home. The loneliness was gone and they didn't speak, they just hugged. But after this hug that went on forever, they looked at all of the other birds that were around and they set them all free. It took hours. I mean, there were 7,000 birds here. Well, 999, because obviously Jorinde was already saved. And he took the flower and he set every single one of those women free. They all turned back into their human form after being touched with it. They took turns. Jorinde did it also. Joringel did it also. They set the birds free. They turned them back into women. And that day, that evening, into the dark night, underneath the moonlight, Joringel and 7,000 women walked through the deep woods back to their human lives. And it's said that nobody ever saw this castle again. Nobody ever saw the witch again. Some called her a witch, some called her a fairy. She was remarkable, whatever creature she was. And Jorinde and Joringel, apparently, according to the old stories and according to the Brothers Grimm, lived happily ever after.